Seasonic, the heart of your system.
What is up, guys? This is Luke Hill for Kit Guru, and in front of me I have the new Intel Core i9 9900KS. So this is the brand new 5 GHz all-core, 8-core beast. So let's take a deeper look at it. So to start off with, yes, this is fundamentally a Core i9 9900K that has been factory overclocked to 5.0 GHz. So by that logic, the clock speed increase over the current 9900K, which you can buy, is 300 MHz, because this will boost up to 5 GHz on all cores and will actually sustain 5 GHz on all cores, even in AVX workloads. So this is a purely 5 GHz CPU, making it 300 MHz faster than the Core i9 9900K. Importantly, the base clock is also increased by 400 MHz versus the Core i9 9900K, so coming up from 3.6 GHz to 4 GHz. And in power limited or throttling scenarios, that might be important. Typically with the motherboards that we tend to use as enthusiasts, it's not all that important, to be honest. So one of the other big differences versus the Core i9 9900K is the 127 watt TDP, and that's an increase from 95 watts for the 9900K. Now, we know TDP is basically a pointless metric at this point. However, what it does help do is to configure the PL1 and PL2, the power states for the Turbo Boost operating mode for these Intel CPUs. However, when you put this inside a typical Z390 motherboard, where the high end or even low end sometimes across the variety of the vendors, it will just operate at full frequency and full unlimited, more or less, power scenarios all of the time, so you get a maximum boost clock. So not all that important unless you are putting it inside an OEM motherboard or a motherboard that allows you to stay to the 127 watt TDP and the power states defined with that. So according to Intel, this is actually a Core i9 9900K, but a better version, hence the S. So the S for stronger, steroids, special, whatever you want to call it. It's the best of the Core i9 9900K wafers, according to Intel. And that's probably pretty reasonable when we look at some data from Silicon Lottery. So the fact that it can do 5 GHz on all cores, including in AVX workloads, that actually puts it very much near the top percentage of Core i9 9900Ks. Whichever way you look at it, the fact that you can do 5 GHz all-core AVX is actually quite impressive, even compared to a manually overclocked 9900K. Just for reference, Leo uses a 9900K, myself and James, part of the Kit Guru team, we use a 9900K, so that's two different chips between us. Neither of those can do 5 GHz all-core AVX. Both of them will top out at 4.9 GHz with sensible voltages. So it is reasonable to believe Intel when they say that actually this is the best silicon for the 8-core chips. So it seems though this is a S or special edition part, if you prefer. Intel is highlighting that this is limited edition and perhaps limited time only. So that means, in typical Intel fashion, you can raise the price, right? Why not? So the asking price for this, or the MSRP I should say, is $513 US, and that's an increase of about 14 to 25 US dollars versus the Core i9 9900K. So you are paying more, but you are getting more, according to Intel. So it seems pretty reasonable. It's not too much of a price premium if you look at the frequency increase. Even though this is a faster version of the Core i9 9900K, it's still using the same process node. So this is still Intel's refined 14 nanometer process technology. And some people might shout, oh, 7 nanometers, AMD, TSMC. And yes, we know the AMD and TSMC 7 nanometer node is very efficient for Zen 2 and Ryzen 3000. However, Intel deserves a lot of credit for just how far they've pushed the 14 nanometer node, especially when we're referring to frequency. Intel still holds a clear frequency advantage versus AMD and TSMC 7 nanometer node. And that really does help certain situations, as we've seen with the 9900K. So yes, it's nothing new as far as process technology goes, so don't expect any leaps in efficiency or any other significant uplifts. However, it's impressive to see this 14 nanometer process still around, albeit in a refined fashion, now hitting 5 gigahertz out of the box. credit where credit's due, Intel's done a really good job with 14 nanometers in lieu of the 10 nanometer that they've been struggling with. So other than those points we've highlighted, this is fundamentally no different to a Core i9-9900K. There are some differences, so one of them is the lack of Intel vPro support, but we'd imagine this is not really an issue for most of the target audience of this processor, which is likely to be enthusiasts and high-end gamers. So one of the other big differences that is quite unimpressive, if I'm being honest, is the decrease of warranty on this part versus the standard Core i9-9900K. So typical Intel boxed processors come with a 3-year warranty as standard in the UK. This part, however, according to Intel, because it's special edition or limited edition, is only a 1-year warranty. Yes, so your limited edition or special edition, your better part, comes with 2 years less warranty. Not sure how I feel. No, I am sure how I feel about that. I feel pretty salty about that, to be honest. Now, the enthusiast inside you might say, I don't care, I'm going to overclock anyway and it'll void the warranty. And yep, that's perfectly fine. You may not care about warranty. However, the pessimist inside me says $513 US on a CPU that Intel only guarantees to work for 1 year. That's pretty frustrating in my opinion, especially when the slightly cheaper and slightly slower Core i9-9900K is a 3-year warranty chip which you can probably overclock to pretty similar performance to this one. So yeah, that's perhaps a deal breaker to some people and a bit of annoyance in my opinion, to say the least. So yeah, they are the main points highlighted, the main differences and the similarities to the Core i9-9900K. Obviously we're still talking LJ1151 Rev 2 for the CPU socket. We're still talking Z390 support if you want the premium best out of the box solution. We're still talking 16 megs of L3 cache, 16 PCIe Gen 3 lanes. Obviously your platform lanes extend that if you're using it with a Z390 motherboard, overclocking via Z390, DDR4 memory support. Everything is the same as the 9900K, just you get those differences that we highlighted earlier in the video. So let's not spend any more time talking about this. Let's jump into the performance. So our test system consists of the Gigabyte Aorus Z390 Extreme motherboard, absolute beast of an LGA 1151 Rev 2 motherboard with a really high performance power delivery solution. For memory, we're using 3200 MHz G.Skill FlareX C14 16GB kit, and this is Samsung BDI DDR4. Power comes from the absolute beast of a power supply, so the Seasonic Prime Titanium 1000 watt power supply, which gives us a lot of clean power, and dual 8-pin connectors. When it comes to pixel push-in power, we're using the beastly Gigabyte Aorus RTX 2080 Ti Extreme, and this is an absolute overkill graphics card for the enthusiast gamers. And we use a custom fan curve on this to eliminate thermal throttling and ensure consistency between test platforms. For our cooling solution, we had to use something pretty beefy to say the least, so we went for a 240mm AIO from Corsair. This is the Corsair H100X, and we slapped on two 24-35 RPM SP120L fans because we needed that extra fan speed to keep temperatures below 100 degrees Celsius. So out of the box, the stock operating conditions for the 9900KS in this motherboard were around about 1.38 volts VCore under Cinebench or Ada64 load. So that's pretty high out of the box, but that was for the 5 GHz all-core, including in AVX workloads. For our overclocking, we had to keep to the 1.375, 1.38 volts target because this was about as far as we could push it with reasonable cooling, so a dual high-speed fan liquid cooler. So we stuck to 1.375 volts, we applied the turbo load line calibration mode inside the UEFI, and then we pushed the frequency. So we managed to push the frequency up to 52x on the multiplier, so 5.2 gigahertz. No AVX offset, so you get a full 5.2 gigahertz frequency. And the load voltage was about 1.38 to 1.392 volts under Cinebench and Ada64. Temperatures were pushing right against the 100 degrees Celsius max, but we were just below where we were happy, so kind of low to mid 90s. We could just about sustain the clock speed, so 5.2 gigahertz with a quick and dirty overclock. Very, very impressive. Starting with Cinebench R15, we see Intel's Core i9-9900KS deliver multi-core performance that is 7% faster than the stock 9900K. Overclocking to 5.2 GHz adds another 84 points or 4% to the 9900KS's score. Compared to AMD, the 9900KS beats the cheaper Ryzen 7 3700X narrowly both at stock and overclocked speeds. The similarly priced Ryzen 9 3900X and its dozen Zen 2 cores comprehensively outperform Intel's 5GHz octa-core by 46% stock versus stock. Single-threaded performance gives the 9900KS a strong victory in Cinebench R15. Hovering around the top of our chart, even the efficient Zen 2 architecture cannot claw back enough performance to offset the sheer frequency advantage for Intel's Coffee Lake refresh chip. It really is impressive to see how far Intel has pushed the 14nm node for high frequency performance. The 5GHz 9900KS is 5% faster than the stock 9900K in Cinebench R20 multi-threaded performance. AMD's Ryzen 7 3700X is also beaten by 7%, though it is a cheaper product. Versus the Ryzen 9 3900X price competitor, Intel's 5GHz chip is handed a crushing performance defeat. The AMD Zen 2 12-core part is faster by 39%. Yet again, we see impressive single-threaded performance from the high-frequency 9900KS. Interestingly, the AGESA ABBA update for AMD's Ryzen 3000 parts puts heavy pressure on the 5GHz Coffee Lake refresh chip. Hitting 4.6GHz properly, the Ryzen 9 3900X actually beats Intel's 9900KS by the slightest of margins at stock. Overclocked is where the 9900KS flexes its might, with the 5.2GHz clock speed opening up a 2.5% performance lead over the 3900X. A 13-second time reduction versus the 9900K gives Intel's 5GHz Special Edition part a 6% lead in Blender. Versus the similarly priced Ryzen 9 3900X, however, the 9900KS is beaten by a sizable 49 seconds or 24%. Variability in the 7-zip benchmark puts the 8-core Coffee Lake refresh chips roughly on par for the compression result. AMD's Ryzen 3000 parts perform considerably better despite the 3700X costing around £200 less. A 7% lead opens up for the 9900KS versus the 9900K in the 7-zip decompression test. Intel's 8-core chip narrows the deficit to AMD's cheaper Ryzen 7 3700X, but the stock Ryzen 9 3900X still outperforms Team Blue's 5GHz processor by a rather large 55%. The lead for the stock 9900KS in our Handbrake X264 test is 4% versus the 9900K. Overclocking the 9900KS to 5.2 GHz adds another 4% onto its performance. Compared with the Ryzen 9 3900X, Intel's similarly priced 8-core competitor cannot keep pace. The 12-core Zen 2 chip is 32% faster stock versus stock and 33% quicker overclocked versus overclocked. X265 performance is an area where Intel's AVX implementation for Coffee Lake refresh continues to show strength versus AMD's Zen 2 architecture. The 9900KS beats the stock 9900K by 4% and matches the performance of the Ryzen 9 3900X. Overclocking the 9900KS to 5.2 GHz allows Intel's 8-core chip to leapfrog the overclocked 12-core Ryzen 9 3900X into top spot. This test also serves as an example of the benefit of clock frequency in thread-limited workloads. Memory bandwidth is an area where AMD's Zen 2 architecture and Ryzen 3000 CPUs tends to very slightly outperform Intel's Coffee Lake refresh competitors. The Core i9 9900KS does not change that situation. Intel's Coffee Lake refresh chips dominate AMD's Zen 2 competitors in terms of memory latency. This is one of the factors that will help the 9900KS outperform AMD's Ryzen 3000 CPUs in gaming on average. Ashes of the Singularity is fairly well multi-threaded in its CPU-focused test. Despite its thread count deficit versus the AMD Ryzen 9 3900X, Intel's Core i9 9900KS takes a comfortable victory. The performance lift over the 9900K is slim in this game. The 9900KS 5GHz 8-core chip hovers around the top spot in Deus Ex. The performance lead over the 300MHz slower 9900K is minor. However, the FPS advantage versus the Ryzen 3000 competitor is perhaps a little more noticeable for high refresh rate gamers. The 9900KS is close to the top spot in the Division 2, with the Core i9 only having its average FPS value beaten by Intel's Core i7 9700K, which lacks hyperthreading. The 9900KS's performance lead over Ryzen 9 3900X is slim but measurable. Far Cry 5 catapults the 9900KS to top position in our chart. Frequency is the key driver in this benchmark, so overclocking the 9900KS to 5.2 GHz helps to open up an advantage versus our slightly slower 9900K. Far Cry 5's engine typically favours Intel hardware, and that's exactly what we see when checking the Ryzen 3000 results. If you must game at ultra-high refresh rates in Far Cry 5, the Core i9 9900KS is a better option than AMD's Ryzen 9 3900X. Grand Theft Auto 5 is another title that tends to favour Intel's frequency-rich processors. we see the Core i9-9900KS boosted to top position thanks to its frequency advantage, stock versus stock, and overclocked versus overclocked. Compared to the stock Ryzen 9 3900X, the 5GHz Core i9-9900KS offers 12% higher average FPS, which, importantly for high refresh rate gamers, puts the Intel chip past 120 FPS on average. Interestingly, Ghost Recon Wildlands tends to favour Intel's non-hyper-threading Core i7 at the very top of our chart. The 9900KS comes in at basically the same performance level as the 9900K, except for minor run-to-run variations that limit this benchmark's consistency. AMD's Ryzen 9 3900X is slower than the Core i9 9900KS, but the deficit is not huge in this title. Another chart topping performance for the 9900KS in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Realistically, the performance differences between the 5GHz i9 and the i7 9700K are within margin of error. However, the 9900KS manages to comfortably outperform AMD's Ryzen 9 3900X, albeit at a frame rate that is already high enough even for the most high refresh rated gamers. Moving quickly through the 1440p gaming results, we see Intel's Core i9 9900KS continuing to sit at the top or joint top spots in our chart. The margins of difference are significantly constricted as more onus is put on the GPU performance. That brings AMD's Ryzen 3000 competitors right into the performance picture with their results in Deus Ex and The Division 2. However, Far Cry 5 still shows preference for Intel hardware and can run at high enough frame rates at 1440p to highlight those differences. Power consumption is the clear caveat when it comes to owning Intel's 5GHz 8-core i9-9900KS processor. Despite Intel's claims of higher grade silicon for the 9900KS versus the 9900K, the voltage is still being pushed hard in order to maintain the 5GHz clock speed. This results in the 9900KS showing the highest power consumption figures for all of today's comparisons. The increase versus the stock 4.7 GHz Core i9-9900K is 24 watts in Cinebench. Our software readings highlight a peak CPU package power of just under 210 watts for the 9900KS, which is around 30 to 40 watts higher than the 9900K's software readings. AMD's Ryzen 9 3900X looks highly efficient by comparison, despite featuring 50% more cores and threads and higher multi-threaded performance in general. It is clear that Intel has pushed the silicon incredibly hard to achieve such high frequencies. Unsurprisingly, the performance per watt from Intel's Core i9-9900KS is poor, just as we've seen from other high-frequency Coffee Lake refresh parts in productivity applications such as Cinebench and Blender. The difference in efficiency between 7nm Zen 2 and highly clocked Coffee Lake refresh 14nm++ chips is gaping. Given the high power draw, it is absolutely no surprise to see high operating temperatures from the Core i9-9900KS. If you're buying this processor, make sure you invest in a high-end CPU cooler. There may be additional headroom to reduce the voltage whilst maintaining the 5GHz clock speed, so that's probably worth trying too. If you want to overclock past 5GHz, be prepared to bash against the 100°C TJ Maxx in certain workloads. Our logs show a software reported maximum of 220 watts CPU package power when running at 1.38 to 1.392 volts. That's a lot of thermal energy for a CPU cooler to move away from a mainstream sized CPU heat spreader. So there we have the new Intel Core i9-9900KS. It's effectively a Core i9-9900K, which is brute force pushed to the wall, out of the box 5GHz on all 8 cores, including in AVX situations. So it's a 9900K on steroids, quite frankly. So the good thing is you get that out of the box performance from the 5GHz clock speed. So yes, I know some people will argue that the 9900K can hit 5GHz with overclocking. You get this out of the box, you drop the chip in, you apply the relevant settings in the BIOS, and you've got 5GHz, as simple as that. No overclocking, no stress testing, no messing with voltages, no risk of BSODs. It just works out of the box. So to some people, that will be of benefit. To others, they would rather overclock the 9900K, and that's perfectly fine. But to some people, the 5GHz out of the box without headaches will be a big factor. We were actually quite impressed by the additional overclocking headroom on this 5GHz chip. I mean, it's really pushed pretty far out of the box. But the fact that Intel says this is the better silicon from the Core i9-9900K, so slightly improved silicon versus those alternatives, it's good to see that we got another 200 MHz on the all-core frequency with perfect stability, with roughly the same voltage and only a small increase in power consumption. Well, relatively small because the power consumption is so high anyway. So 5.2 GHz for a stable all-core overclock is very, very impressive on an 8-core chip. So in my opinion, the extra $20, $25 or so is a reasonable price premium over the previous 9900K. Now, that doesn't account for the fact that the 9900K at this point is arguably poor value, especially compared to the Zen 2 Ryzen 3000 competitors. So yes, we know this is currently the fastest gaming CPU that money can buy, it just simply is. But that doesn't necessarily make it good value because you get a lot of that performance with some of the lower cost chips, even from Intel's own Coffee Lake refresh lineup, such as the 9700K. So yes, I think the price premium over the 9900K is reasonable, but that opens a whole new argument for whether the price of the 9900K at this point is reasonable or not, and that's up to you. It depends on your workload, of course. It's very disappointing that we only get a 1-year warranty versus the typical 3-year warranty you get with Intel boxed products. That is, at worst, a sign of Intel's perhaps lack of trust for the longevity of this processor. That's highly unlikely, and that would need additional validation. Whichever way you look at it, it's less peace of mind for a product that you're paying more for, and I think that could be a slight thorn in the side for people who are honestly considering purchasing this 9900KS over a 9900K. You have to decide whether you're happy to pay more for the reduced warranty, and some people simply won't be happy to do that. And as is obvious at this point, if you really do want to run this CPU day to day, if you want to push it hard and if you want to really get those 5 GHz clock speeds and maintain them, you're going to need a hefty motherboard power delivery solution. So you want a decent Z390 motherboard, not a bargain basement one with a poor VRM. You're going to want a very strong CPU cooler, so a dual fan AIO with good fans and a good pump, or something like a Noctua D15, so a hefty air cooler. And you're just going to have to put up with the rather large power draw from your system, but that's fine if you want the frequency. It's a simple trade-off. So versus the current Zen 2 lineup, obviously the Ryzen 9 3900X is the main competitor, this probably £500-ish price point. Probably a tough sell if you're doing anything other than simply high refresh 120Hz plus gaming. If you are doing 120Hz plus gaming, that's all you care about and you absolutely demand the highest frame rates possible, this is the CPU to buy. This is an excellent choice. And if you're not a high refresh rate gamer who absolutely demands the highest refresh rates and the highest frames per second counts, then yes, the Ryzen 3000 alternatives are certainly worth looking into. They're better value, they've got better power consumption figures, their frequency is lower and they're less fun to overclock. But overall, they're a very well-rounded solution, especially when you look at the AM4 X570 platform compared to Z390, which is looking slightly old at this point in time when you compare things like Gen 4 and USB 10 gigabits per second. One thing to note is obviously Intel has the strength of the iGPU versus the Ryzen 3000 competitors. And yes, on a £500-ish overclocking geared chip, we're probably not going to care about the iGPU. But if you do a lot of gaming, which is an ideal scenario for this chip, but then your only other heavy multi-threaded productivity work comes from Adobe Premiere Pro, that inbuilt iGPU and the hardware encoding capability is actually of good value and can actually claw back some of the performance deficits that we typically see versus the 3900X in multi-core workloads. So that's something to consider, but obviously that's quite a niche use case in my opinion. So yeah, credit where credit is due to Intel. We as enthusiasts often complain that we're not interested in slight reductions in power draw and slight improvements to the iGPU. Intel has given us what a lot of us want, which is an absolute pedal to the metal, overkill, out of the box, push to the extreme CPU. You need a hefty motherboard, you need really high-end cooling solution, you are going to be able to push this even further if you're an overclocking enthusiast. So they give you all those things that really get your senses and your heart pumping if you're an overclocking enthusiast. So it's good to see. As a product, it's perhaps not the best value when you look at the competition from Ryzen 3000, but it's a pretty cool enthusiast part nevertheless. So I've been Luke Hill for Kit.Guru. Thanks for watching our review of the Core i9 9900KS. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this is a good product from Intel? Are you happy to see Intel really push even further? Or do you think it's time that we start moving on with a newer architecture from Intel? If you like this video, give us a like and hit that subscribe button. And make sure you go over to the Kit.Guru website to check out the full written review with more detail. If you want to support what we do here at Kit.Guru, make sure you check on our Patreon page and head on over to our merch store. I'll see you next time.